are so brave. So brave. We've got music as part of my brief presentation. I want you to hear at least a part of this song. One of my biggest complaints about a lot of the music that young people listen to is that it doesn't do what music used to do. It doesn't encourage them in a direction that's about healing. It doesn't challenge them to think about what it is they're consuming. And very few times does popular music take a risk that might result in them not being played on radio because they're trying to make money, trying to make profit. They're not trying to do those other things. So here's an example of a song you may have never heard, but I think everybody should hear it. Yorkie Porter's 1961. So you understand why I would recognize that song is important, because you don't hear that. You hear more songs that, especially with young kids in urban areas and college-age kids, they listen to a lot of music that promotes violence against each other, against women, against the planet. All things that make little sense to me, that seem really out of step if you think about how powerful music was, at least in the 60s and 70s. The music that was played in my house when I was growing up included Marvin Gaye and Curtis Mayfield, the gentleman Stevie Wonder, who sang beautifully but who didn't shy away from choosing lyrics that were about bringing people together and celebrating the good things, and also point out the things that were challenges that need to be overcome. And what I love about that song is that one, it's a song. It's upbeat, it's jazzy, but it kind of tricks people into listening. And then it takes on the real stuff. And the real stuff is really, when I'm not writing about family and identity and place, I really feel I have no choice but to write about social justice. Today in the NFL will be the largest protest collectively to date because of what is happening in the last 36 hours, which I'm sure all of you are painfully aware of. But I think this is a good thing, but unfortunately, the counter-argument, the counter-narrative has been so concentrated that they've taken what the protest is all about out of it. That song is in protest of young men dying in the streets from violence in general, and specifically from the hands of bad policemen or bad blue bullets, which exist if you look at what happens over and over again. If you look at the statistics, it's not an anomaly. I mean, it seems almost like an organized thing. It happens so often and so much. So I'm going to read a poem that's really, it's a prose poem, but it's an allegory. It's about football, and it's not about football. It's called The Persecution of Kaepernick. There was a boy whose father was so well loved and respected that when he walked into the room, everyone stood up and put their hands over their hearts. They lived in a beautiful white house, but when the boy peered out the window, he could see boys who looked just like him getting shot down in the street, while his father watched and smiled and said nothing. When he complained to his mother, she hugged him and whispered, "They probably broke the law." When he asked which law, she tugged nervously at her too curly hair and said, "On this planet, it's against the law to not be white." Then she begged him to stop asking questions and to ignore all the voices he thought he heard coming from the cement bricks in the house's foundation. And though they were made from the teeth and bones of the dead, she told him that all those relics in the mortar were willingly sold to his father, or lost fairly in games of war. His father loved death and war and games. Mounted in his trophy room were the tortured busts of Sioux, Cherokee, Igbo, Asante, Chinese, Mexican, Vietnamese, Somali, Palestinian, and other little boys of color from all over the world. One day the boy's father caught him kneeling and praying for all the new little boy bodies he found piled up in his father's big game room. Angry, his father beat him every night before all the people and told him that he was only free to cry because model patriots were so good at stacking little boy bodies. And then he told the boy to stop whining and sit down and shut up and be happy and enjoy all his privileges, or he could never play outside again. Now that's about football. And it's not about football. But it's really about the challenge of trying to find I can't think of a more silent and disruptive way to make a statement than to kneel. And the fact that that action has been conflated into being anti-patriotic and anti-American is shameful. And it shows you how strong and argumentative the people who've led that fight against any kind of protest that it would impact something that makes money. And I'm happy to report, as you all probably well know, that the NFL is not making money this year. And they want to say, the people in the counter narrative, they want to say that it's because people don't want to see the protest. But nobody at home watches the anthem on TV. That's when you go get another bowl of something or run to the bathroom and come back for the kickoff. It's the kickoff. It's not the anthem that we tune in for. What's happening is people are boycotting the NFL and to fill in their pockets. And I'm a huge football fan, and it's been difficult to not tune in, but except for last night, I've enjoyed college football. It's been equally entertaining. One of the things that, obviously he's defending is these young men being disappeared in some cases. I do a lot of work in the schools, and one of the things that I'm trying to be a champion of is trying to get more African American males to go into the classroom as teachers. In the United States, less than 2% of all teachers look like me. There's a whole lot of young people whose lives might change if they saw someone like me in their classroom. For me, I think about the 7th grade when I finally saw a version of my future. I never even considered teaching until I saw James Atkins in front of the classroom. It was never even a possibility. In fact, I don't know if I had any male teachers at all until 7th grade. And it just kind of woke me up. And I've been on that course, even though I tried to get away from it when I thought about how poor I would be trying to be a teacher. I made my way back because I realized how important it is in classrooms. And most of my full-time occupation is teaching. And then I also do a lot of hustling on the side, teaching for free or visiting prisons, I visited institutions that try to heal people on addiction, people with mental challenges, all through the South. I think that my work is in the South. There's enough people working in the North and out in California and the West Coast, but there's a huge need in this region, and I'm committed to it. I want to read a poem that comes out of being tricked into doing one of these events. I was invited to a middle school, and if you teach, you know that there's middle school and then there's prisons, and no more need be said. I was invited to visit a school that had 0 African American male teachers or administrators. There was not a black adult male face in the building, and they were having trouble with apparently 20 to 30 young boys. And they asked me when I was in Frankfurt to stop in and just say something to them, and I agreed that I would. When I arrived, the lady at the reception desk said, "Oh, follow me," and she took me to the gym, opened the door, and then closed the door really quickly. And I turned around, and the stands were filled, a couple of hundred kids. And I was stunned for a second. And I thought maybe they gave them all sugar before I arrived because they were bouncing off the walls. And not only were these young people not ready for a program, there was no introduction. I just came in cold, no microphone, just almost 150 young boys who were not happy that I was there. And the longer I stood there, the more they wanted to ignore me. At some point, I just walked into the stands with them, and I started touching them on the shoulder. And I tried to find the most disruptive energy in the room. And when I found him, and he tried to shrink away from my touch, but clearly he ruled the whole room. Because when he calmed down, and it was just me touching his shoulder, and him first being in shock, and then leaning into it, and then actually calming down, that the rest of them in concentric circles calmed down. Then I walked back to the front, and I said, "Good morning." And they start sneaking in the back room because they heard it get quiet. Maybe they thought I was dead. And they were stunned that I wasn't yelling. I didn't even say anything to them. I just moved through them and came back out and looked at them. So I want to read a poem that comes out of that experience. It's called Monarchy for the Princes at 2nd Street School. They glare at me with their nostrils flaring, then avert their gaze when I don't wilt. They puff out bony chests, spread their shoulders like lizards in the wild, needing to scare off a would-be predator. But I step even closer, let them feel my presence, let them measure themselves against all the space I claim. In the blink of an eye, I tell them I am a man, black, that I recognize their nonsense, smelled it on their breasts as soon as I walked into the room. There are no other black men in this space, so they are filled with faux braggadocio, fueled by the smell of their own piss, have laid claim to the space by default. The teachers, all young and white and undertrained, fear them. Fear their hair, their clothes, their music, their shoes, their body language. Fear any and everything that smells like confrontation, simmers like unmedicatable rebellion, and looks like the 6 o'clock news. But I'm not trading in fear. I'm only afraid that they have been in captivity so long they won't recognize my scent. I pace back and forth and show my teeth. I lean in like alpha males do. I need them to understand that we are from the same pride, and I'm here to show them what they will look like when their manes grow in. For 90 minutes, I become the father they never had. I am the core standing behind their mothers, even the ones who are white, insisting that they listen to me, the women who gave birth to them, their teachers, everyone responsible for their futures, lest they have none. I am the disciplinarian, promising consequences for their unacceptable behavior, pushed back for their initial disrespect, held to pay for their indifference, remedies for their short attention spans, directions and roadmaps for their yet unrealized dreams, but only because I love them. I love their potential. I love their wide-eyed promise. I love their well-masked fears. I say all of this without ever opening my mouth, with a gentle hand on every shoulder, with serious eyes and a don't test me smile. Every time I arrive any place with a room full of cubs, and I am the only lion. So, those two things are connected. And Kaepernick really believes that, when a young boy from that space gets shot down and his mother is in tears, that, she's not seeking retribution or punishment or revenge, but she's looking for justice. And in almost every case in America, since it's been on the 6 o'clock news, 1 out of, I think, 87 cases, the policeman was charged and found guilty, but not sentenced. So there seems to be zero consequences to taking these young lives, and that's what those protests will be about today in the NFL. The work I do, when it's not about my personal history and the space I live in, I try to find ways to connect it to other things in the world that are about the same things. One of my, I guess, more talked about successes is a book about Medgar Evers. And the thing about this book is that it does something very non-traditional. It invites the voice of the killer into the conversation. And people weren't ready for that, but it allowed the conversation to move in a way that caught people off guard. I'm going to bring that voice into this space, but I'm going to counter it with what this book also tries to do. This book is designed to be a blueprint for racial reconciliation. As you move through it, you have to start in the space that has the most pain and is born out of, and that is in the voice and energy of Byron De La Beckwith, this very public, proud, violent racist who bragged about killing Medgar his entire life, up until his death, even after he was found guilty in his third trial and spent a few years in prison at 80 years old. But he lived his entire adult life bragging about having done the deed. But I want you to hear his voice and his energy. An undercover FBI policeman testified that he said that killing Medgar was no more difficult than the pain women endure when they give birth to our children. So he compared taking a life with giving life, which says a lot about him and what he feels about women, I think, in general. So this poem is appropriately called Afterbirth. It's in the voice of Byron De La Beckwith. Like them, a man can conceive an idea, an event, a moment so clearly he can name it even before it breathes. We both can carry the thing around inside for only so long, and no matter how small it starts out, it can swell and get so heavy our backs hurt and we can't find comfort enough to sleep at night. All we can think about is the relief that waits at the end. When it was finally time, it was painless. It was the most natural thing I'd ever done. I just closed my eyes and squeezed, then opened them, and there he was, just laying there, covered with blood, but already trying to crawl. I must admit, like any proud parent, I was afraid at first, afraid he'd live, afraid he'd die too soon. Funny how life and death is a whole lot of pushing and pulling, holding and seeking breath, a whole world turned upside down until somebody screams. Now, if you feel the darkness in that tone, it's on purpose. And that poem is countered by Myrlie Evers, who's the widow of Medgar. And her response is an imagined conversation or address to De La Beckwith's wives, his first and second wife, Willie and Thelma. It's called Sorority Meeting. Myrlie Evers. My faith urges me to love you. My stomach begs me to not. All I know is that day made us sisters somehow. After long nervous nights and trials on end, we are bound together in this unholy sorority of misery. I think about you every time I run my hands across the echoes in the hollows of my sheets. They seem loudest just before I wake. I open my eyes every morning, half expecting Medgar to be there. Then I think about you. And your eyes always snatch me back. Your eyes won't let me forget. We are sorority sisters now, with a gut-wrenching country ballad for a sweetheart song, tired funeral and courtroom clothes for colors, and secrets we would take to our graves. I was forced to sleep night after night after night with the ghost. You chose to sleep with the killer. We all pledged our love, crossed our hearts, and swallowed oaths before being initiated with a bullet. So throughout the book, there are dueling energies that try to balance it so that you can make it through the end of the book. Most people read the book all the way through, but the hard part is in the beginning. So at the end, you really understand and appreciate how you can even reach something that feels like healing. But I think I think that's what reconciliation is all about. But you need the joy and the pain for it to have some balance. Check the time really quick. Good? One of the things that's happening in Lexington right now, and you may have driven across it or heard about it or seen words just say Unlearn Fear and Hate. Unlearn Fear and Hate comes from a poem I wrote called Love Letter to the World. And Love Letter to the World is a huge project that includes tattoos and 14 different languages to date. There are over 1,100 people around the world who have a piece of this poem tattooed on their body somewhere and a graphic image that goes with it. That image is part of a larger image that will be unveiled next year. We're going to play that for you at the very end of this because there's also a video that comes with it, so you can hear the energy of that poem and song. But I want to, I guess, close with a poem that comes from a different space, because you can't be in Kentucky and not write about horses. You know, I have a collection that is really based on a play I wrote originally. And it's about the life of Isaac Murphy. And in my opinion, Isaac Murphy should be even more popular than Muhammad Ali, but he's been written out of history. Most people don't remember his whole story. It's not so much that he was a great athlete and rode horses and won 44% of every race he was ever in, but it was his high character and the fact that he didn't even gamble. People gambled on him and what he did. And if you read the newspaper articles from the 1800s, they spend as much time talking about the race as they do about this man's character. And he's 5 foot tall, maybe 120 pounds, impeccably dressed, but he was living in a time just after the Civil War, during Reconstruction and post-Reconstruction, when it was very difficult to be a black man in the United States, traveling around the South. But he did it with such flair and pizzazz that you think it was a Muhammad Ali in a different era. This whole book is about his story. I'm going to read the last poem from here that's in the format of a praise song. And a praise song is something that comes out of African tradition where a hero or local leader, instead of having a history book about this person, a song is created to praise them. So this is the praise song for Isaac Murphy. And you hear all the Kentucky and horse references in here. But you also hear the things that really make him worth remembering and pointing to in the same way that we idolize or lift up Muhammad Ali outside the boxing ring. Straddling the distance between African Cemetery No. 2 and the Kentucky Horse Park, between the straw-lined stables at Churchill Downs and the view from Millionaire's Row, between our racist history and our proud past, I offer these words, this elegy, this praise song for Isaac, for every master teacher blessed with a willing student, for Jimmy Wingfield and William Walker, Pat Day and Calvin Burrell, Eddie Arcaro and Angel Cordero Jr., for every jockey hypnotized by the speed, power, and the music of racing, for every trainer, groom, hot walker, and stable hand who palmed a brush, carried a bucket, or lifted a shovel, for every Derby Day hero generous enough to take a jockey along for a ride, for every yearling dreaming of a garland of roses, for every also ran, I recommit this husband to his wife, the son to his mother, the student to his teacher. I offer all of them to each of us. I dedicate this ride to a man whose life's work was a blueprint for anyone, black, white, or brown, hoping to build something better, hoping to fulfill their own potential, to use all their gifts and blessings in an honorable way. Isaac Murphy's life teaches us how to honor our parents, how to love full speed, how to outrun prejudice and oppression. I dedicate this ride to America and Kentucky's son, to a legacy worthy of a star on the walk, a boulevard named in his honor, this book. Wrap your arms around his story. Close your eyes. Feel the wind whispering in your ears. Grab the reins of any and everything that makes your heart race. Find your purpose. Find your purpose and hold on. That's Isaac Murphy. And I'll give the last word to Isaac's mother, who I don't know that I can read this poem and not hear my own mother in these words. When I think about trying to finish this book and trying to imagine what the relationship was like between Isaac and his mother, I reached back to my own mother, who's now deceased, but she was a Pentecostal minister for 22 years. And so you can imagine what it was like at our house all the time. So I'm gonna read this poem, and then you guys are gonna hear this last thing, and the hostage situation will be over. This is America Burns, his mother. It's called Healing Songs. They call them spirituals, but what them really are is every bad thing that happened to each of us rolled up in a ball of sorrow and placed in the pit of our stomachs. When we start to hum and moan, all we're trying to do is lift that ball and let it rise up our throats. If we can get it all the way to our tongues, we can almost taste the original sins. But if we can find the strength to carry it to the end of the song, what we find waiting is peace. And in case we meet so much darkness we think can't be no God, he put somebody in our lives that allows us to see God in everything they do. I know some dark days, but he sent me Isaac. Thank you.
Mr. Walker has said that he'd love a discussion. If you have comments or questions or whatever. So if you want to, Mr. Walker, if you want to come on up, that'd be great. And just stand up and do your thing. Maybe they're so stunned that you're...
Well, I should tell you that there was actually just a commercial for the whole song. It's about 3 times longer than that. But if you Google "Love Letter to the World," you can hear the whole thing and see the videos. That young man that had tsunami on his arm, that's my son. If you couldn't tell by his nose, he and I got our tattoos at the same time. So it was a beautiful.
Tattoos are beautiful.
It was a beautiful day. Yes, we agree. And they're in 12 different languages around the world. Yes.
We have to look at the makeup of who the police are. And it seems to me that they're coming from the military. They're going right from military brain to civilian. They can't make that transition. Is there some process, do you think, would be helpful, to reacclimate into civilian society those who are police?
Well, I think your answer is in the question. I mean, I think there's, if you look at what's happening to a lot of veterans and how underwhelming the support for them, so many homeless men are veterans, especially amputees. and PTSD victims. Yeah, I think I would love to see some of those $1 billion spent on that end of soldiering instead of buying more, faster, bigger, better weapons, which is what we seem to continue investing in. I don't know how you increase a military budget but don't increase care for those veterans whose numbers grow every year. You know, all of my brothers and most of my uncles are all military men. So I'm very close to what happens when they come home. And there is no reacclimation. They get off the plane and they have some time at the base to finish out some days and process paperwork, but they don't process themselves or get processed. You know, thought about it the way they do space, you know. When the astronaut comes back, they don't just walk back in their living room. I mean, they have to be decontaminated. You know, they have to have, you know, there's all kinds of things about their transition that I think that should happen out of respect for how our brains work and how we are built emotionally and psychologically. But I don't think that's the only problem with that situation. I think part of the problem is the justice system. You know, I think if there were consequences, or at least more consequences, I think the numbers would drop dramatically. But if you look at what happens, it's like it's legal to do it. I mean, 13-year-olds, you know, holding toys. You know, men in Walmart with a toy gun. I mean, people with cigarettes. People, you know, the whole thing with, you know, resisting is against the law, but if somebody who's, you know, not wearing a badge comes from behind you, is choking you to death and tells you to not resist, I don't know how you accept dying and not resist. But then that resistance is the thing that becomes the reason you were killed. And then this whole idea behind, I felt threatened by an unarmed 13-year-old boy, and I had a gun and a taser and a billy club and a police car. I mean, it happens over and over. And I say that, and I have two best friends who are policemen. And so I know the challenge that they have in the decision making they have to do in an instance. But their training is part of that, you know. You know, they can be trained differently. They can be trained better to respect, you know, not just human life because they are. Because you look at the numbers, I mean, what happens with black and brown bodies and what happens with, you know, there are people who have killed a dozen people and get taken to a restaurant on the way to the jail, not in handcuffs. I mean, why are there, you know, mass murderers who walk away from situations? You know, why can some people have guns in their hands and others can't even have a thing that looks like a gun in their hand? I mean, there's something really wrong in America when you look at that really that close. And the military part of it, military portion of that is just part of the solution, I think. But the reacclimation, clearly. The young man who's handling the books today, his dream is to be a policeman. And he's been training to lose weight. He's been trying to get his mile down under the time. He's taken tests in Lexington and Richmond for the last 5 years, and he almost made the cut, I mean, every time. But he wants to be a policeman. I mean, we believe in the role of policeman, but we also understand that, you know, if you're a bad person, you can be a bad person and be a poet, and be a bad person as a policeman. You can be as a mayor, as a president. I mean, you're going to be who you are, no matter what your job is. And I think that I don't have the solution. I make observations. I'm a poet. That's what I do in the world. Yes, ma'am.
You escaped death as a child, as a boy, that so many black men experience. You escaped, it seems to me, the future of so many black men. How did you escape?
Did I mention that Pentecostal minister?
Amen.
Well, you know, I think for me, growing up in Danville, Kentucky, I mean, We didn't have a drug problem. We didn't have a violence problem. We didn't have any gang problems. We didn't have any turf problems. Our issues, the biggest drug was weed. The biggest violence happened on the football field between the two rival high schools. And when people fought in the streets, there were no weapons. I mean, it was hand to hand. It was a different time. So I think it's unfair to compare that. I know I survived, but I have a cousin the same age who lived in Detroit who did not. At 15, he was shot in the back by a policeman, and he did not make it home. So it was very personal to me. And I know that, my survival is not an accident. I know that my mother said we have purpose-driven lives, and if we don't live out our purpose, then we're wasting our time here. So I should be home watching football, but I have a purpose, and I'm trying to use that in a good way.
We are forever grateful. And I say absolutely. Yes, Dandelion?
I think purpose is the real issue. I think we don't have purpose any longer. Our children don't have purpose. Parents don't know how to instill purpose. Cell phones don't give purpose. Facebook and Twitter and all the other ones, whatever they are, see how old I am, don't give purpose. They set us up for fights without knowing where we put our feet. How do we teach? How do we impart, not teach, purpose?
Best question? Well, I think it's something that has to be a full-time commitment. I know as a parent and a grandparent that most of that happens at home. I mean, I think that purpose should be tied to the thing that young person is passionate about. When I was coming out of high school, I wanted to study art and writing, but I was told that there's no money in that I would starve, that I should use my academic success and go be an engineer or a doctor and lawyer and make money. So I went off to UK to major in engineering. And I hated college that first year. And part of it was I didn't feel like I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. And it wasn't until I decided that college wasn't for me and took a job in a factory and found out that wasn't for me either. That my mother and I, we compromised, and I agreed to go back to school if I could study the thing I loved. Because I really knew and understood that my purpose was not loading trucks. It was not even engineering. It wasn't making money. It was being creative, making art, doing something in that space with young people, being a public person, and trying to make a difference in the way that she did, but in a different way, in a different audience. And she got that really quickly. She thought that she was raising me to be a minister, but she went to my very first public poetry reading, and it was at the, maybe in the library here in Richmond, her first reading. And at the end, she said, "I got what I wanted." So, but I think poetry and protest, this is not the first church I've been in on a Sunday with poetry. So she got what she wanted. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
And we got...